Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan. Today we're going to be continuing our Best Space Marine series. So far, we've done the Clone Troopers, Colonial Marines, and Starship Troopers. Today we're going to continue with the Halo franchise, and we're not going to be looking at the ODST because they are special forces, and we're also not going to be looking at the Spartans because they are heavily genetically modified and hardly even human anymore. Instead, we're going to be looking at the UNSC Marine Corps and their 10 flaws. Don't forget to stay until the end of this video so you can rate them in our poll. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so that when we do our next episode on the 10 advantages of the UNSC Marines, you can vote again. The UNSC, or United Nations Space Command, was a powerful all-encompassing agency that focused on exploration, science, and defense on behalf of all of humanity. With humanity unified in an effort to conquer the stars, the UNSC provided international support to allow Earth's colonists to safely expand into the unknown. At its core was the UNSC Navy and the Expeditionary Marine Corps. A few hundred years later, by the end of the 25th century, humanity had colonized over 800 worlds, and like the Star Wars galaxy, the outer edges of humanity's territories were sparsely populated and mainly used for harvesting resources, which were then refined and shipped inwards towards the Sol system, where the majority of manufacturing and wealth was centered around. The inner colonies, the source of many of the investments for these outer rim projects, grew richer and more powerful. The massive gap in political power and wealth between the inner colonies and the outer colonies naturally created a lot of tension. An insurrectionist movement started in the outer colonies, and these freedom fighters, or terrorists depending on who you ask, started facing off and actively fighting with the UNSC security forces. For 30 years, these innies, as they were called, fought the rest of humanity, greatly expanding the UNSC's power and budget. Didn't mean, though, that the UNSC security forces focused mainly on training, tactics, and weapons for fighting other humans, and more or less disregarded the possibility of a hostile first contact scenario, which unfortunately meant that humanity was woefully unprepared when they encountered the Covenant. Had it not been for Dr. Hasley's Spartan 2 program, we would have surely been doomed. The Halo story takes place 500 years into the future, but for some reason humanity is still depending on relatively primitive kinetic energy weapons. And no, I don't mean handheld railguns, but good old-fashioned gunpowder weapons with more or less the same stopping power and penetration as weapons we have today. I find it really alarming that there's so little development in small arms technology, especially when you compare it to other technology that humanity has managed to create, including FTL travel by using the slipstream generator, and they were even able to create a fully sentient AI. With all these amazing technological advancements, having firearms in the 26th century seems very antiquated. What's even more troubling is that a lot of the firearms designs that we see in Halo seem to have taken a step backwards from our own time. Let's take a look at the MA5B, the main assault rifle for the UNSC Marines. This was an unnecessarily large and bulky weapon. Compared to an M4 carbine commonly used by our current US Marines, it looks like this. The MA5B is actually closer in size to a squad automatic weapon. Part of the reason why the MA5B was so unwieldy was because the MA5B chambered the larger 7.62mm round in a support weapon size 60-round magazine. It's very possible that the UNSC uses this larger round because of advancements in body armor and just increased usage of body armor. Our own military is facing this problem right now as more and more insurgents and enemy combatants are able to purchase cheap body armor online and on the black market. Now, there are a variety of political, economic, and tactical reasons why NATO chose the 5.56 over the 7.62, but one of the major reasons was weight. Depending on the type of material it's made from, an AR magazine chambering a 5.56 round is usually 20 to 50% lighter than an AK magazine chambering the 7.62 and of a similar size. So the MA5B, despite having more stopping power, is incredibly heavy and not practical for CQB environments. The ammo is also way too heavy to carry more than 3 or at most 4 additional clips because of the 60-round capacity. And on top of that, the MA5B is notorious for having terrible aim and accuracy, and at ranges of just over 40 yards, it was relatively hard to hit individual targets. To make matters worse, there was no selectable fire modes. The thing only fired in full auto. So essentially what you have is an entire infantry force equipped with light machine guns. The weapon only makes sense ergonomically if you're a 7-foot-tall genetically modified superhuman. While the MA5B's 7.62mm round was considered quite powerful by our own modern standards, they really weren't as effective against the Covenant, who wielded a variety of different types of shields and armor. While grunts were easy to put down with a short burst of automatic fire, everything from the Jackal on up could prove problematic for a Marine fire team without heavy weapons or the ability to flank the enemy. As a matter of fact, combat records show that on average, a Marine had to hit an elite at close range with at least 45 rounds from an MA5B before they were able to register a kill, which I find both hilarious and extremely sad. It's the equivalent of Tom Hanks with a Colt 45 versus a Tiger tank. Maybe Tom Hanks will get lucky and get a shot through the driver hatch. Maybe a P-47 will dive out of the sky and blow up the tank. But most of the time, resistance is futile. The only handheld firearm the Marines had that was capable of consistently taking the enemy down in a single shot was the SRS-99 anti-material sniper rifle, which fired the ridiculously large 14.5mm round, which was originally first designed by humanity as an anti-tank round. Side by side, it makes the 50 BMG look like a supermodel. On top of that, the SRS-99 only had a 4-round magazine and is just about 2 inches shorter than Tom Cruise without the benefits of Scientology. It's just not practical as an all-around infantry rifle. The problem wasn't that humanity couldn't design a firearm, it was the fact that they were using firearms in the first place. There's just a limitation with gunpowder weapons. The more you increase the power, the larger the weapon and ammunition becomes. As awesome as the SRS-99 anti-material rifle was, you could only realistically carry maybe 5 mags at most because they were so freaking heavy, not to mention the massive recoil you get with an anti-material rifle. That was the beauty with the Covenant plasma weapons. While these were also quite large by human standards, they also possessed increased firepower, capable of taking down larger Covenant foes. Even the less powerful plasma pistol, when overcharged, could take out a Spartan II and Mjolnir armor in about 1 shot. Which is why pretty early on the UNSC started training their own Marines to use Covenant weapons in case their own ammunition ran out. But my question is, why didn't the UNSC Engineering Corps, or ONI, start doing their own reverse engineering of Covenant plasma weapons? They are obviously superior to our own firearms and would have drastically increased the effectiveness of non-Spartan regular infantry. In one of our previous videos, we broke down the various components of the Halo Mjolnir armor and determined that ONI's scientific capabilities were extremely advanced, having been able to reverse engineer Covenant shield technology, by far one of their most impressive pieces of technology. The Covenant shield technology was definitely more advanced than their plasma weapons, and I think ONI could have easily reverse engineered these weapons. As important as the Spartan II and Mjolnir projects were, they were really just for special forces and designed to be used on a very small scale. Imagine equipping your entire infantry force with weapons that actually can kill the enemy. That would be a game changer. The UNSC Marines typically wore the M52B body armor or similar ballistic armor along with the CH-252 helmet. Made from metal alloys, these pieces of kit were great at stopping human-sized ballistic rounds. Human-sized being the key word. You had Covenant ballistic weapons as well. If you look at behemoths like the Brutes, they could dual-wield 15-pound spiker carbines, which essentially fired out gigantic metal vampire-killing stakes. I mean, look at the size of that thing. It's more than a foot long. Anyway, the point is, human armor was useless against Covenant ballistic weapons like needlers and spikers, and not even properly designed to stop a plasma round. We're not really sure how much this piece of kit weighs, but you're probably better off going into combat wearing shorts and a t-shirt. That way you can at least move around, and if you are going to get your face melted off anyway, might as well be comfortable. The Warthog has always been one of my favorite vehicles in science fiction. It's something that I would really love to own one day. But unfortunately, it's poorly designed for the type of battles that the Marines were involved in. As a ground vehicle, it's not really fast enough to run away from banshees or ghosts, and at the same time, it's too poorly armored for a real heavy assault. The thing also has no doors and no roof, which is good and bad. Good because the Warthog had a tendency to flip over very easily, so it was kind of easy to get out upside down. Bad because if the Warthog flips over and you fall out of the vehicle, you might get crushed by something. Another really troubling fact about the Warthog was, if you look closely at UNSC history, the Warthog has been in service for 200 years. In comparison, here's what humanity was using 200 years ago as a reconnaissance vehicle. So yeah, 200 years is really stretching that platform's use beyond its reasonable limits. Like the Humvee, the Warthog was a weapon designed for a past war and was ill-equipped for the current one it was fighting. Now, the Warthog didn't just flip all the time because of its high center of gravity and extremely soft suspension. It was also because, for some reason, the UNSC had some of the worst drivers I've ever seen. I do have a theory about this. In the future, it's very likely that all the cars will be self-driving. This will probably happen once the technology is mature enough and the insurance companies realize the cost benefits of removing human error from the equation. So at this point, driving yourself will most likely be a luxury or maybe even illegal, which is why most humans probably don't really understand how a car works in the 26th century, which is why the Warthog is continuously getting flipped over. Another big disadvantage the UNSC Marines had was the lack of air support. Besides the Pelican dropship and a few other gunships and VTOLs, the UNSC Marines seemed to lack true air superiority craft and depended heavily on the UNSC Navy to provide cover for their ground forces. And oftentimes they couldn't even do that, which meant the vulnerable Pelican had to oftentimes drop into heavily contested areas without any air cover. Which is stupid because not everyone is a Spartan and capable of surviving falls from extremely ridiculous heights. And as we've seen time and time again, even if the UNSC Marines are able to squeeze out a victory on the ground, the Covenant can just bring their fleet over a planet and glass it. I mean, this really limited the Marines' strategic options, and it was severely demoralizing to see a planet that you just risked your lives fighting for get turned into a lifeless molten mess in the matter of hours. Ultimately, the Marines were tough enough and flexible enough to adapt to the Covenant threat and protect humanity. Their flaws mainly lay in their equipment and vehicles and not necessarily their training or mindset. Despite being pushed to the brink, the Marines were able to win enough battles to help humanity survive the alien onslaught. So guys, now it's time for you to vote for the UNSC Marines. Give them a rating between 1 to 5, 5 being the best. Just hit that little button in the top right corner. Also, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on our next episode where Ben will be looking at the Colonial Marines' advantages. And in my next episode, I'll be looking at the advantages of the UNSC Marines. Well guys, thanks for joining us today. My name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie and you are the protagonist, and never get into a Warthog with a Marine driving it.